Stewardship in the Promised Land, Part 1 is the title of our message, taken from Deuteronomy chapter 15 and verses 1 to 11. Principle of the release for debtors is the first thought. Provision of the Lord is the second thought. As we review the principles of financial stewardship, we can observe that God ordained work for wages. For in the sweat of thy face, Genesis 3:19 says, thou shalt eat bread, till thou return unto the ground, for out of it was thou taken. For dust art thou, and unto dust shalt thou return. This is a consequence of the fall of man, recorded in Genesis 3 verse 19. Man is to work in order to sustain his physical life, so human labor is that which is ordained of God to feed or sustain physically man till the day he dies. For his labors, man shall receive the fruit of his labor to feed and sustain his physical life. This is grace to man as it keeps him away from indulging in further sin as a consequence of idleness. Honest, hard work is God-honoring. In the sweat of thy face, this came in the wake of man's fall. God said to Adam in Genesis 3, verses 17 to 18, because thou hast hearkened unto the voice of thy wife, and hast eaten of the tree of which I commanded thee, saying, thou shalt not eat of it, cursed is the ground for thy sake, in sorrow shalt thou eat of it all the days of thy life. Thorns also and thistles shall it bring forth to thee, and thou shalt eat the herb of the field. God sent the thorns and the thistles as a result of the curse that God pronounced upon the ground, that will manifest itself in the thorns and thistles that would impede the growth of the herb of the field, so that Adam has to spend time weeding to have a good harvest. In the New Testament, the Apostle Paul wrote of a similar thought when he said, applying Genesis 3:19, he says in 2 Thessalonians 3 verse 12, now them that are such we command and exhort by our Lord Jesus Christ, that with quietness they work and eat their own bread. It is the will of God, the command and exhortation of our Lord Jesus Christ, that we are to work and enjoy the fruit of our labor. 2 Thessalonians 3 verse 10, for even when we were with you, this we commanded you, that if any would not work, neither shall he eat. With their hands at their proper callings, and so support themselves, provide for their families, and have something to give to them that are in need, by which means they will live peaceable and quiet lives in godliness and honesty, and not disturb the peace of neighborhoods, churches, and families, and eat their own bread. Jill says, got by their own labor, bought with their own money, and not the bread of others, or that bread of idleness. And so the thought given there, that honest hard work is God-honoring, and be not slothful. Proverbs 21 verse 25 says, the desire of the slothful killeth him, for his hands refuse to labor. Proverbs 21:26, he coveteth greedily all the day long, but the righteous giveth and spareth not. Instead of working, the sluggard daydreams. He is full of desire, full of craving for delight. Instead of working all day, he craves for more. He is never satisfied. People talk of dying from overwork, but there is a death that comes from not working enough. Instead of merely craving, they do something useful so that they may have something to share with those in need. Ephesians 4 verse 28. Let him that stole steal no more, but rather let him labor, working with his hands the things which is good, that he may have to give to him that needeth. The sluggard is like the Dead Sea, where nothing can live. He is constantly taking in as he craves for more and more. Like the Sea of Galilee, full of life, the righteous gives without sparing. So there's a contrast there, a promised land illustration. More than that, we are to do so to the honor and glory of God. And whatsoever ye do, do it heartily to the Lord and not unto men. Colossians 3 verse 23, whether therefore ye eat or drink, and whatsoever ye do, do all to the glory of God. 1 Corinthians 10 verse 31. We encourage our young men and women to develop a healthy attitude toward work. Honest, productive work is the backbone of strong families and blessed nations, says Bob Swash in the book Created for Work. Honest, productive work is the backbone of strong families and blessed nations. God put his heart into his work. God doesn't finish things just to get them over with. When he made the frog, he painted the frog's eyes gold. God adds distinct and beautiful touches to each thing he makes. His energy and creativity are without measure. They overflow into everything he does. Drudgery and bare minimums have not part in his work. Some things he makes are very simple, yet even their simplicity is a work of art. Honest hard work brings wages. This is the biblical concept of honest money. Thou shalt eat thy bread. Human labor is that which is ordained of God, whereby man feeds and sustains himself physically till he die. Money has been used to quantify this labor. It is a unit of a man's labor whereby he could use to feed himself till the day he dies. Savings is the accumulation or accumulated or stored value of human labor, whereas debt is the obligation to serve human labor. This is the biblical concept of honest money. The Bible's teaching is that man can enjoy the fruit of his labor. It is given to him by God, who has enabled him to work, and there is nothing better for a man than that he should eat and drink, and that he should make his soul enjoy good in his labor. This is from the hand of God. And also, that every man should eat and drink and enjoy the good of all his labor. It is the gift of God. Ecclesiastes 3 verse 13 and Ecclesiastes 5 verse 19. So, the biblical concept of honest money teaches us of honest hard work. It also shows us that debt is enslavement. It is an obligation to fulfill future labor. An obligation to fulfill future labor. We earlier defined debt as the obligation to provide human labor and savings as the accumulated or stored value of human labor. So the Bible tells us in Proverbs 22 verse 7, the rich ruleth over the poor, and the borrower is servant to the lender. Borrowing lands a man into debt, such that he becomes a servant to the lender. Sadly, this enslavement binds the borrower in spiritual as well as economic bondage. Matthew 6 verse 24 says, no man can serve two masters, for either he will hate the one and love the other, or else he will hold to the one and despise the other. Ye cannot serve God and mammon. What does debt enslavement mean to the average Singaporean? Today, he takes out a 30-year mortgage to buy a house, a 7-year loan to buy a car. Each month, he also has to pay his credit card bills and meet other repayments for study loans, renovation loans, or for the higher purchase of furniture. He has fallen into the trap of the capitalist economy. Even with a full-time job, his wages can barely help him service his many debts. When he loses his job, the roof caves in on him and his family. He is obligated to provide human labor for many years to come to pay off his debts. Servicing these debts is serving mammon. This is the modern man's enslavement. Fiat currency creates an illusion of prosperity. And this is the system that we are in today. And we say that we are probably in the tail end of fiat currency. It makes one feel good and secure with the value of their inflated wealth. America, for example, has been able to create wealth by cranking up money printing machine instead of providing by goods and services through labor, the labor of their hands. That's the last 40 years. The Bible warns against this in Proverbs 23, verse 4 to 5. Labor not to be rich, cease from thy own wisdom. Wilt thou set thy high eyes also upon that which is not? For riches certainly make themselves wings. They fly away as an eagle toward heaven. This world's prosperity today is created by debt. It is a make-believe prosperity, an illusion, a deception. Right? Today we see that the biggest debts are government debts, what we call bonds, right? And the bond market, right, is in a state of great teetering. Why? Well, because the underlying value of a people, a nation, an economy is in productive uses of human labor that is able to bring benefit. But today you see there is not that concept anymore. Right? You don't need to work. You can print. That's the trouble today. And 30, 40 years ago, we said that a bowl of a noodle costs 10 cents. Right? 10 cents, yeah. But today, a bowl of noodle costs $10, $8, $5. So what has happened over the last 40 years? Well, we say that the monetary system has undergone from an honest system to a dishonest system. Right? In 1971, 72, there was the unpacking of gold to the US dollar. Right? Previously, you can exchange gold for the dollar, but when you unpack that, the value of it, right, changes. You cannot. And so where is the value? The value is just simply in that piece of paper. So how much value is there on a piece of paper? Well, that's the trouble in our world today, and we are moving into a stage whereby you cannot sustain a world with a make-believe prosperity. And this is very serious. Right? The nations, especially the developing nations, right? Look at China, they have been developing over the last 20 years. Right? Everyone borrows, and then they would try to service their loans. Right? But today, the bubble is so great, there is no more space for further creation of wealth, as it were, that we have reached a stage whereby men and women are not having jobs, and they cannot sustain the debts that they have incurred, that they have placed together. And so you see a the road ahead, if it's not properly handled, can be great misery, right, for many. Imagine you're on a loan and you can't default, as it were. But if you don't default, then you have to work. Take one job, take two jobs, take three jobs. And how much can a person and the body sustain itself? Right? Before long, many would break down. And for what cause? For what reason? Right? This is the discontented world, the greedy world that we lived in. Vincent van Gogh, he painted a picture called The Potato Eaters in 1885. Van Gogh said he wanted to depict peasants as they really were. He deliberately chose coarse and ugly models, thinking that they would be natural and unspoiled in his finished work. He says, "You see, I really have wanted to make it so that people get the idea that these folks who are eating their potatoes by the light of their little lamp have tilled the earth themselves with these hands they are putting in the dish. And so it speaks of human manual labor and that they have thus honestly earned their food. I wanted to give the idea of a wholly different way of life from ours, civilized people. So I certainly don't want everyone just to admire it or approve it without knowing why. In order to facilitate a store of men's labor, money is introduced. We receive wages and remunerations for labor rendered in the form of wages." In ancient Israel, the Lord commanded Israel when they entered the promised land to do something to help the debtors. The principle of release for debtors, verse 1 to 3 of Deuteronomy chapter 15. In the end of 7 years, thou shalt make a release. And this is the manner of the release. Every debtor that lendeth aught unto his neighbor should release it. He shall not exact it of his neighbor or of his brother, because it is called the Lord's release. Of a foreigner thou mayest exact it again, but that which is thine with thy brother, thine hand shall release. So there's a difference there between the brother who is a fellow steward in the promised land, allocated by inheritance a portion of the land that God has given to them, each tribe, each family. And then there are the foreigners, those who are not a part of Israel. Right? Here they are the way by which the Israelite is to handle is different. Right? Matthew Henry observed well, he says, "A law for the relief of poor debtors, such we may suppose as were insolvent." Insolvent means that they have no ability, no way to pay. Right? The reason is not given there why they were in debt, because of sickness, because of disease that come, because something happened to someone in the family. Perhaps the breadwinner is not well, right? And therefore the rest of the dependent are in trouble. Or they had to, in order to live, they had to borrow. So they go to their neighbor, go to the people around them to borrow. And this is not uncommon, isn't it, in our previous generation, in the sense that as migrants, many who come here, you realize that to eke out a living, life was so difficult. And not everyone was provided for. There are those who had the means, but there are those who did not. And so here is given to us a law. Every 7th year was a year of release, in which the ground rested from being tilled and servants were discharged from their services, among other acts of grace. So we have learned that when they were to till their ground, there is such a thing called the Sabbath year. Right? On the Sabbath year, they will not till. So they will till their ground for 6 years. Then on the 7th year, they are to leave their ground fallow. In other words, no tilling. Then on the 8th year, they were going to begin to till again. And so it's only at the end of 8th year that they will receive their harvest. So what does it mean? Well, it means that they will not receive a harvest for 2 years, isn't it? The year of the 7th year, where God commanded that the land is to rest, and the year after, when they begin planting, right, they will not receive the harvest immediately. And so the Lord gave this command, law to rest, for the reason of dependence. We have said this before, that God wanted His people to realize that all they have, all that they do comes from Him. It's easy to think that by our own effort we would be able to live our lives, right, without the understanding that indeed it is Him that gives us life. Without the life that He gives us, without the work that He gives us, there is no way we can proceed. And so here is given to us that on the 7th year, servants don't work. And there are those who had borrowed money and those who are not able to pay before. Should this year be released from them? Though if it were able, they were afterward bound in conscience to repay it. Yet there thenceforth the creditor should never recover it by law. In other words, you owe someone, you mustn't go and sue the person, to recover it, because he owe you what you. And Matthew Henry observed. He says, many good expositors think it only forbids the exacting of the debt in the year of release, because no harvest being gathered in that year, it could not be expected that men should pay their debts then. But that afterwards, it might be sued for and recovered, so that the release did not extinguish the debt, but only stayed the process of a time. So while they don't work, they cannot repay. So that release could be just for that period of time, whereby they could not work, and when they could work, they could repay. Then it's fine. See, but others think it is a release of the debt forever, and this seems more probable. He reasons with us. Yet, under certain limitations expressed or implied, it is supposed that the debt was an Israelite, an alien, could not take the benefit of this law, and that he was poor, that he did not borrow for trade or purchase, but for the sustenance or subsistence of his family, and that now he could not pay it without reducing himself to poverty and coming under a necessity of seeking relief in other countries, which might be his temptation to revolt from God. So here he tries to explain the reason why the Israelite should help his neighbor. The law is not that the creditor shall not receive the debt if the debtor or his friends for him can pay it, but he shall not exact it by a legal process. In other words, you see, in our modern world, right, you owe a credit card debt, and you didn't repay. Right, the debt will be sold to a collector's company, and the collector's company will send lawyer letters, and they will charge 50% exorbitant interest rate. Right? We have people whom we know are in that kind of a credit card debt. I have a renovation loan. I borrow, use a credit card to pay, and then I could not repay. I could not repay. And the debt is compounded. The credit card debt is compounded, and then the interest rates becomes very exorbitant. So much so that, just paying the interest is enough to kill. And so here, the Lord wants us to see and understand, right, the nature of, I would say, the nature of debt and the sufferings. And of course, we talk about the responsibility. Right? The responsibility we said earlier about man having to labor, right, for his sustenance, for his subsistence, not to be idle. And here, but here is given to us the reason for this law, right? Because it is called the Lord's release, to put an honor upon the sabbatical year. The sabbatical year. This was God's year for their land. As the weekly Sabbath was God's day for themselves, their servants and cattle, and as by the resting of their ground, so by the release of their debts, God would teach them to depend on His providence. Right? You release someone's debt means that you lend somebody something, right? And you're not going to get it back. Okay? You're not going to get it back because once you released it, right, you cannot exact it from the person. But that is yours, what belongs to you. So you may have made some calculation as to what your wealth will be. But if you were to release this, then you'll find that on your part, right, whatever that you have will be reduced. Okay, so the Lord is saying here that trust Him to provide. This year of release typified the grace of the gospel, in which is proclaimed the acceptable year of the Lord, and by which we obtain the release of our debts, that is, the pardon of our sins, and we are taught to forgive injuries, and so we are and hope to be forgiven of God. So there is a principle that is highlighted here when we talk about relieving somebody who is in a desperate situation. Desperate. It was to prevent the falling of any Israelite into extreme poverty, so that, as the margin reads, to the end that there shall be no poor among you, none miserable or scandalously poor, to the reproach of their nation and religion, the reputation of which they ought to preserve. In other words, the people around them are crying because they don't have. Well, here is given to us the injunction. The second thought, provision of the Lord. Verse 4, save when there shall be no poor among you, for the Lord shall greatly bless in the land which the Lord thy God giveth thee for an inheritance to possess it. So here, as we were mentioning, right, when we were studying the 7 principles of biblical finance, right, that we ought to save. Right? Only when we are able to save, that's only when we are able to be a lender, isn't it? Able to give. But of course, we say that before we would be able to save, there is the responsibility of taking care of the needs of our families and the people around us, isn't it? To take care of our family, to make sure that their needs are provided for, right, in the labor that we labor. Of course, the first thing is to return to the Lord, isn't it? In acknowledgement of what He has given us, and to take care of our family, and to take care of ourselves, isn't it? Right? Because you're the one laboring, and you need to ensure that you take care of your own health, your own bodily well-being. So you use what you have earned right? To take care of yourself, take care of your family, to the Lord, to the family, to yourself. And then whatever you have in excess, you can save, isn't it? Then you save, and whatever you can save, there the Lord provides us with a stewardship. Right? If you can't save, you have just enough to provide for yourself, then you're not in the position of saying that, I can do this and do that and do this, isn't it? Yeah. So that's something that the Lord wants us to see and understand and learn these basic principles. Right? Save that there shall be no poor among you, for the Lord shall greatly bless thee in the land which the Lord thy God giveth thee, for an inheritance to possess it. Only if thou carefully hearken unto the voice of the Lord thy God, to observe, to do all of his commandments which I command thee this day. Matthew Henry once again said insightfully, God's security is here given by a divine promise that whatsoever they lost by their poor debtors, it should be made up to them in the blessing of God upon them, all they did, all they had and did. Verse 4 to 6 tells us that when we do according to God's commandment, right, the Lord ensures that we will not be poorer for our giving. Jesus says, it is more blessed to give than to receive. And how can we experience the blessing of giving? Well, unless we try the Lord, isn't it? As it were. We said that we are going to, by faith, obey what the Lord teaches us. And when you do so, you realize that, how come you're not poorer by your giving? But the Lord does make up for it in what He has promised in His Word. Let them, so Matthew Henry says, let them take care to do their duty. And then God would bless them with such great increase that what they might lose by bad debts, if they generously remitted them, should not be missed out of their stock at the year's end. Not only the Lord shall bless thee, verse 4 says, but He shall bless, He doth bless thee. It is altogether inexcusable if, though God has given us abundance, so that we have not only enough but to spare, yet we are rigorous and severe in our demands for our poor brethren, for our abundance should be the supply of their wants, that at least there may not be such an inequality as it is between two extremes. 2 Corinthians 8 verse 14 says, but by an equality that now at this time your abundance may be a supply for your want, that their abundance also may be a supply for your want, that there may be equality. They must also consider that their land was God's gift to them. So when they were given the land, it was by inheritance. Right? Inheritance. The land is by inheritance. So what does it mean? It means that it is given to them. It's given to them. God's gift to them. So we must not forget that all their increase was the fruit of God's blessing upon them, and therefore they are bound in duty to Him to use and dispose of their estate as He should order and direct them. And lastly, if He should remit what little sums they had lent to their poor brethren, it is promised that they should be able to lend great sums to their rich neighbors, even to many nations, and should be enriched by those loans. So here, the Lord shows us the principle. Verse 6, for the Lord thy God blesses thee, as He promised thee, and thou shalt lend unto many nations, but thou shalt not borrow, and thou shalt reign over many nations, but they shall not reign over thee. Thus, the nations should become subject to them and dependent on them, as the borrower is the servant of the lender. Proverbs 22 verse 7. To be able to lend and not to have to need to borrow, we must look upon as a great mercy and a good reason why we should do good with what we have, lest we provoke God to turn the scales. So here is given to us and shown to us what that stewardship entails. Here is the law in favor of poor borrowers, that they might not suffer by the former law. Men would be apt to argue, if the case of a man be so with his debtor, that if the debt be not paid before the year of release, it should be lost. It were better not to lend. No, says this branch of the statute, thou shalt not think such a thought. So to say I don't lend because surely the person cannot repay. Of course, if we don't have it, by us, in a sense that these are not excess money, excess in the sense that something that we don't need for our subsistence, then it is the principle there. It doesn't say that you take those that your family needs and go and give it to somebody, and then your own family come into one. No, that's not the stewardship that we are speaking about. Okay, but whatever that you have excess, you are able to give, then you do so. You see, you're obliged to, in the sense that this is the excess that you have, that is by you. You see, so very reasonable, isn't it? Very reasonable. It is taken for granted that there would be the poor among them who would have the occasion to borrow, verse 7, and that there would never cease to be some such objects of charity, and that there would never cease to be some such objects of charity. The poor shall never cease out of thy land, though not such as were reduced to extreme poverty, yet such as would be behindhand and would have occasion to borrow, and of such poor he here speaks. And such we have always with us, so that a charitable disposition may soon find a charitable occasion. In such a case, we are here commanded to lend or give according to our ability and the necessity of the case. Thou shalt not harden thy heart, nor shut thy hand. If the hand be shut, it is a sign of the heart is hardened. Or if the clouds were full of rain, they would be empty themselves. Ecclesiastes 11 verse 3. If the clouds be full of rain, they empty themselves upon the earth. And if the tree falleth toward the south and toward the north, in the place where the tree falleth, there it shall be. Bowels of compassion would produce liberal distributions. Is also the New Testament teaching, as is given here in Deuteronomy 15. James 2 verse 15-16 says, if your brother or sister be naked and destitute of daily food, and one of you say unto them, depart in peace, be ye warmed and filled, notwithstanding ye shall give them not those things which are needful to the body, what doth it profit? Verse 8. But thou shalt open thy hand wide unto him, and shalt surely lend him sufficient for his need in that which he wanteth. Beware that there be not a thought in thy heart, wicked heart, saying, the seventh year, the year of release, is at hand, and thy eye be evil against thy poor brother, and thou givest him not, and he cry unto the Lord against thee. So he says that, seventh year coming. So if I lend to him, then I have to release it after that. So I'll lose it. So don't lend. So this is the thought there. Thou shalt surely give him, and thy heart shall not be grieved when thou givest unto him, because that for this thing the Lord thy God shall bless thee in all thy works and in all that thou puttest thy hand unto. For the poor shall never cease out of the land. Therefore I command thee, saying, Thou shalt open thy hand wide unto thy brother, to the poor and to the needy in thy land. Thou shalt not only stretch out thy hand to him, and reach him something, but thou shalt open thy hand wide unto him, to lend him sufficient. Sometimes there is as much charity in prudent lending as in giving, as it obliges the borrower to industry and honesty, and may put him into a way of helping himself. Right? To help him. Do something. We are sometimes tempted to think when an object of charity presents itself, we may choose whether we will give anything or nothing, little or much. Whereas it is here an express concept, I command thee not only to give, but to open thy hand wide to give liberally. Here is the caveat against that objection which might arise against charitable lending from the foregoing law for the release of debts, verse 9. Beware that there be not a thought, a covetous, ill-natured thought in thy Belial heart. The year of release is at hand, and therefore I will not lend what I must then be sure to lose. Lest thy poor brother, whom thou refusest to lend to, complain to God, and it be a sin, a great sin to thee. The law is spiritual and lays a restraint upon the thoughts of the heart. We mistake if we think thoughts are free from the divine cognizance and check. God sees not just what we do, but what we think. That is a wicked heart, indeed, that raises evil thoughts from the good law of God, as theirs did, who, because God had obliged them to the charity of forgiving, denied the charity of giving. We must carefully watch over all those secret suggestions which would divert us from our duty or discourage us in it. Those that would keep from the act of sin must keep out of their minds the very thought of sin. When we have an occasion of charitable lending, if we cannot trust the borrower, we must trust God and lend, hoping that for nothing again in this world, but expecting it will be recompensed in the resurrection of the just. Luke 3 verse 35, our Lord says, But love your enemies, do good and lend, hoping nothing again, for nothing again, and your reward shall be great, and ye shall be children of the highest, for he is kind unto the unthankful and to the evil. Luke 14 verse 14, and thou shalt be blessed, for they cannot recompense thee, for thou shalt be recompensed at the resurrection of the just. It is a dreadful thing to have the cry of the poor against us, for God has his ear open to that cry, and in compassion to them will be soon to reckon with those who deal hardly with them. That which we think is our prudence often proves sin to us. He that refused to lend because the year of release is at hand thought he did wisely, and that men would praise him as well or as doing well for himself. Psalm 49 verse 11. But he's here told that he did wickedly, and that God would condemn him as doing ill to his brother, and we are sure that the judgment of God is according to truth, and that what he says is sin to us will certainly be ruin to us if it be not repented of. Here is the command to give cheerfully whatever we give in charity. Thy heart shall not be grieved when thou givest. Verse 10 says, Be not loth to part with thy money on so good an account, or think it lost. Grudge not a kindness to thy brother, and distrust not the providence of God, as if thou shouldest want that thyself which thou givest in charity, but on the contrary, let it be a pleasure and a satisfaction of soul to thee to think that thou art honoring God with thy substance, doing good, making thy brother easy, and laying up for thyself a good security for the time to come. What thou doest, do freely, for God loveth a cheerful giver. 2 Corinthians 9 verse 7. Every man according as he purposes in his heart, so let him give, not grudgingly, of necessity, for God loveth a cheerful giver. Here is a promise of a recompense in this life. For this thing the Lord thy God shall bless thee. Covetous people say, giving undoes us. No, giving cheerfully in charity will enrich us. It will fill the barns with plenty. Proverbs 3 verse 10. And the soul with true comfort. So shall thy barns be filled with plenty, and thy presses shall burst out with new wine. Isaiah 58 verse 10 to 11. And if thou draw out thy soul to the hungry, and satisfy the afflicted, then shall thy light rise in obscurity, and thy darkness be as the noonday. And the Lord shall guide thee continually, and satisfy thy soul in drought, and make fat thy bones, and thou shalt be like a watered garden, and like a spring of water, whose waters fail not. Matthew Henry. Thank God for His grace in showing us the principle of release for debtors, and to realize that the providence and the provision of God for our good. Amen.